He survived a flash that erased an entire city, boarded a train to safety, and found himself speeding straight into something far worse than another bomb. What waited for him beyond the blast was not human, and it was already waiting for him. The morning air was heavy with heat. Sweat clung to his skin, not from the sun, but from a fear that had seeped into every bone. He had survived. The flash had turned the city into light, brighter than the sky had ever known. Buildings had folded inward, like paper burning in slow motion. He could still hear the screams. He could still smell the iron tang of blood mixed with the acrid sting of smoke. The blast had thrown him to the ground. Shards of glass were still lodged in his arm, glinting under the gray ash that rained from above. He staggered through streets that were no longer streets, but rivers of debris. The air was hot enough to sear the lungs. Every breath scraped his throat raw. He had found the station almost by instinct. A train sat waiting, its paint blistered, its windows cracked. The conductor did not speak, only nodded, eyes hollow. The wheels groaned as the train began to move. He pressed his forehead to the glass. The countryside slid past in shades of brown and gray. Fields lay flat and lifeless. Trees stripped to skeletal forms. A strange stillness followed them, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. The air outside was thick, tinted with an unnatural hue that made his stomach twist. Somewhere deep inside, a cold certainty began to form. He was leaving one hell and moving toward another. The train slowed. A distant rumble rolled across the horizon, low at first, like the growl of an animal too far to see. The ground shuddered beneath the wheels. Passengers turned their heads in unison, eyes wide, unblinking. The sky at the edge of the world began to burn. The light came first. It was not sunlight. It was something sharper, crueler, as if the heavens had been torn open. The glass in the train windows began to hum. Every hair on his body stood on end. His skin prickled. His breath caught in his chest. The brightness swelled, swallowing color, swallowing shadow. For a heartbeat, there was no sound. Then the shockwave struck. The train lurched sideways on the tracks. Metal screamed as the carriages twisted. Passengers were thrown into the air like rag dolls. The ceiling buckled. He tasted dust and blood as his face hit the floor. The roar grew deafening, a sound so vast it drowned out thought. Heat surged in, blistering, unstoppable. Wood splintered. Glass shattered. He felt the air itself crush against him, forcing the breath from his lungs. Somewhere in the chaos, someone was screaming his name, but he could not move. He could not lift his head. Only the burning light remained, flooding through the wreckage, finding him again. The floor beneath him trembled, as if the earth itself wanted to throw him away. His ears rang, a high, piercing note that blotted out all other sound. The heat pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating, as though the sky had fallen. His vision blurred, colors bleeding into one another until everything was the same blinding white. His fingers clawed at the floorboards, splinters breaking under his nails. Somewhere, the steel frame of the train groaned, bending under forces too great to resist. A wall of air tore through the cabin, ripping seats from their bolts, lifting bodies like dry leaves. The smell of scorched metal and burnt flesh filled his nostrils, sinking deep into his lungs. He tried to rise, but the weight of the heat pinned him down. It fell alive, like a giant hand pressing him into the earth. The light dimmed, but only slightly. Enough for the shapes of the ruined carriage to emerge through the haze. Enough for him to see that the world outside was gone. In its place stood nothing but shadows, moving where no wind blew. They swayed and twisted those shadows, as if they were not cast by anything solid. Some were tall and thin, bending at impossible angles. Others crouched low, their outlines shivering, as though they were trying to pull themselves together. His breath caught in his throat. The air was thick, gritty, each inhale scratching at the back of his tongue. The wrecked train lay half buried in ash that shifted like a living thing under the faint breeze. He could hear movement now, soft, deliberate, circling, a whisper of footsteps that left no mark on the ground. His eyes darted to the nearest window frame, shattered but still clinging to the twisted metal. Beyond it, the landscape stretched into nothingness. No trees, no buildings, only a pale, endless expanse under a sky stained red. The shadows crept closer, melting in and out of the light as if testing the edge of its reach. One of them stopped. It turned toward him, though it had no face. He felt its gaze sink into him like a hook. His muscles locked, as if that unseen hook had pierced more than just his mind. The air around him grew colder, in spite of the heat still radiating from the scorched ground. His heartbeat thudded in his ears, slow and heavy, each beat louder than the last. The shadow tilted its head, a slow, deliberate motion, as though studying prey it already knew it would catch. Behind it, more shapes gathered, their forms shifting in ways that made his stomach churn. They did not walk. They seemed to slide, closing the space between them and the wreckage. A faint vibration ran through the floor, like a pulse rising from the earth itself. Somewhere to his left, a man began muttering under his breath, the words breaking into sobs. Another passenger tried to crawl away, but the shadows parted to let him pass, only to close in behind him. There was no sound when they touched him, no cry, no struggle, only the sudden, horrifying stillness of a body gone slack. Then, slowly, the shadows began to move toward him again. He tried to push himself backward, his palms slipping on a layer of ash and blood that coated the floor. His shoulders struck the warped wall of the carriage, leaving nowhere else to go. The nearest shadow loomed over him, its edges flickering like smoke caught in an invisible wind. It reached out, not with a hand, but with something formless, a darkness that curled and coiled as it drew closer. The air thickened, pressing against his chest, until each breath became a desperate gulp. A sound began to form inside his head, low at first, like the murmur of a distant crowd. It grew louder, sharper, until it felt as if it was scraping the inside of his skull. The shadow's presence was cold, but not the kind of cold that came from snow or winter air. It was deeper, the cold of places where nothing had ever lived. His vision swam. The train around him seemed to stretch, the ruined walls bending and pulling away as if the world was tearing at its seams. Through that widening distortion, he saw something far worse than the shadows. It was watching from beyond the horizon of the blasted land. It stood impossibly far away, yet he felt its presence as if it were already beside him, a shape too vast to fit within the frame of the world. Its outline wavered, shifting between mountain storm and something with eyes that burned without light. The shadows around him froze, their movements no longer restless but reverent, as though awaiting a command. The pressure in his skull deepened, pulling at the threads of his thoughts. Memories began to slip away. Faces, voices, even a memory of the city he had fled. He realized with a terrible clarity that survival had been a mistake. The blast had not spared him. It had delivered him. The ground trembled again, and the shadows parted to form a path leading outward into the lifeless plain. Though his body shook, his legs rose of their own accord. Each step was silent, swallowed by the ash. The vast shape beyond the horizon grew sharper, as it drew him closer without distance passing at all. When he finally stopped, the sky above seemed to fold inward, and the light dimmed to nothing. In that perfect dark, he understood he had not escaped either bomb. He had walked into the third.